Welcome, indoor explorer. Dim the lights, let your tea go cold on purpose, and bring a blanket that lies about being fur. Tonight, we walk with the first Arctic expeditions, the oak-ribbed ships, the neat ledgers, the brave mistakes. This isn't a tale of superheroes. It's a ledger of minutes bought with breath. Late afternoon, which up here already feels like an alibi. A sledge party moves over pressure ridges, frozen waves arrested mid-argument. Leather creaks, canvas ticks. The cold behaves like a law rather than a temperature. An officer nurses a sextant as if hope were delicate. The cook thinks in units of fat. Someone coughs and it sounds metallic, a coin hitting ice. If there are dogs, they watch with veteran contempt. If there aren't, men become the dogs, and the grammar of work changes accordingly. Inside the tent, breath from the night has wallpapered the canvas with frost ferns. Brush them, and it snows indoors. Water begins as a theory. Ice into pot, snow in small handfuls, the hiss of a stingy flame. Tea is not comfort, it's infrastructure. Pemmican is not a flavor, its distance rendered edible. The Arctic teaches by subtraction. Less feeling in your fingers, fewer choices in your day. No patience for ceremony. Lists replace speeches, not stand in for promises. Order is the only warmth that scales. You are here to watch that order try to survive the sky. The compass will lie, the sextant will fall silent, and still someone will open a notebook and draw a straight line through weather. We will count what was learned from those who already knew, and what was lost when pride outranked listening. Keep your blanket tight. If it stops feeling warm halfway through, good. That means we're getting close. And if you like getting cold on purpose with me, please like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next march. Chapter 1, Day 1. The Arctic interviews you. The Arctic doesn't greet you. It administers a test. Day 1 is the first question, asked in wind and arithmetic. Pass, and you earn the right to discover how hard Day 2 will be. Fail, and the snow files your case without comment. You wake to a tent that crunches when touched. Overnight, your breath papered the canvas with frost ferns. Brush a sleeve and it snows indoors. The stove, small iron, big opinions, died an hour before dawn. It wants fuel. Fuel wants fingers. Fingers want sensation. You work blood back into them with the care you reserve for borrowed things. Liner gloves stay on. Removing them is how novices learn what instant regret means. There is a way to sit up without spilling cold into your bag. Knees first, roll, collar wool up to the mouth. Hood cord set so you see enough to live, but not enough to be foolish. Outside the flap waits a light that isn't bright so much as certain. The air feels granular. You breathe and learn that pain can be a fine powder. The day's liturgy begins in 2 lines. Snow to water, water to tea. The wrong way is to heap dry snow into a pot and scorch it into steam and disappointment. The right way is to seed the pot with an ice chunk, something that agrees to be liquid. Then add snow by the handful, tamping gently so you don't build a bridge of air. The stove answers in a high, stingy hiss. When the first cup arrives, you do not say thank you. You drink. Tea here isn't comfort. It's infrastructure. Sugar, if you have it, is morale made edible. Breakfast is logic disguised as food. Pemmican with flour into a greasy, faithful paste. Dried meat pounded to a near powder. Bound with rendered fat, sometimes nudged with berries if spirits sag. It's not a flavor, it's distance. The cook watches portions like a banker watching withdrawals. Fat is warmth. Flour is time. Salt is a promise the body understands. Boots next. They were your last thought last night and your first problem now. Someone stowed them under your bag to keep them from freezing into sculptures of themselves. It almost worked. Felt liners slide in like second thoughts. Leather grudges every bend. Laces soften under patience, not force. You stamp carefully to wake toes that have been writing complaint notes to the brain. No one talks much. The soundscape is felt rubbing felt, amidst thumping ribs to recall sensation. Outside, the tent door opens in a small indoor blizzard made of last night's breath. If you have dogs, they watch with veteran eyes that measure your usefulness. If you don't, the empty traces mean men will pull, and everyone adjusts their expectations of the day. Sledges are paragraphs that must be punctuated properly. Oak runners shod in steel, crossbars drilled for lashings, knots that are clauses rather than decoration. You pack to a diagram, heavy, low, and central, fragile deeper in, chronometer, sextant, medical chest padded in quilts, fuel tins along the keel, food bags like a second row of witnesses. The tent folds to a disciplined square. A shovel slides into its sling with the finality of a period. Navigation looks at you and shrugs. The officer strokes the brass of the sextant as if calming a skittish animal, then decides the light is wrong. The compass needle twitches with the personality of magnetism, too near the pole. Dead reckoning takes the chair, speed by habit, heading by will, time by watch, kept in an inner pocket so seconds don't freeze into jokes. Harness on. If there are dogs, the lines twitch with old politics. Lead dogs are obeyed, not appointed. If it's men, shoulder sashes bite with steady cruelty. Motion begins as a low collective sound. The first yards are generous. The next climb a pressure ridge where flows fought and froze into bad geometry. You learn a new literacy. Heel, plant, pull. Breathe on a 4 count, so breath doesn't run away with courage. Too slow and you freeze. Too fast and you sweat. And sweat is betrayal waiting to refreeze. The right pace keeps you comfortably angry. Quarter miles become careers. The sledge grinds over blue shards. Someone coughs a coal stove cough that winter translates into metal. Gloves come off only for tasks that demand skin. When they do, the world shrinks to 1 knot and 1 minute. You finish, jam the hand back into its cave, and ride out the ache like a bill you knew was coming. A short halt arrives without a vote. Bodies are better at democracy than mouths. The cook guards a small blue flame as if it were a crown. Snow, then water, then tea again. A thin reassurance shared around. Someone pours over hard biscuits to fake variety. Someone else silently counts fuel against miles. You learn that many small warmths outcompete one grand one. The ridge crossing that breaks the day's back comes after noon. 2 flows welded by temper form a chapel of translucent slabs veined in old handwriting. You unlash, relash, heave. The sledge rides up, skids sideways, threatens dignity and fingers. Dogs, or men, throw in a last grammar of pull and grunt, and the whole caravan lurches over. For half a minute, you are nothing but boot soles and tendon. On the far side, breath returns like a late apology. Skytrix join the interview. Parhelia, mock suns, hang like punctuation around a coin of light that warms nothing. Sunglasses, if you have them, are medicine. Snow blindness is chemistry, not drama. On the horizon, a stacked band of haze impersonates land. Respectable men have mapped mirages. Your officer refuses the bait and writes a single line. Temp very low, ice rugged, dog steady, men good. Lunch is persuasion rather than a meal. Hunger changes shape. Your legs send memos, fat now. 3 bites of pemmican, a biscuit softened with hot water, and silence. The snow leans in to eavesdrop. You do not tell stories. Talking wastes heat. Afternoon narrows. The wind rotates by a degree and becomes a different person. Your face discovers a country between cheekbone and ear that maps ignore. Everything you own squeaks, knocks, or clicks in rhythms your body answers with a stubborn, narrow music. Look back, and the track writes a sentence. 4, 6, 8 lines of dog or man. 2 grooves of runner. Commas where halts ask to be remembered. Look forward and see the same, which is the point. Another navigation attempt. The sun gives angles spoiled by refraction. The compass sulks. The sextant goes back in its case like hope, put carefully on a shelf. Dead reckoning again, pace bearing time, ticked by a watch kept warm near a stubborn heart. The note-taker's pencil scratches modest numbers that will matter later to people far away. For you, they are simply a promise that today existed. Camp must rise before the wind grows teeth. Site selection is gossip. Some swear by a low hummock, some by a flat pan, all by haste. Shovel, scrape, cut blocks for anchors, stamp a platform. Pegs get persuasion and backboards of snow. Canvas blooms into the comforting geometry of permission. Inside, order returns like a friend. Boots inverted, socks steaming on a line, mitts propped like shy animals. The stove takes flame with an obedient blue. A pot sings. Men's voices lengthen into sentences again. The ledger appears. The officer writes small, economical truths. Progress moderate, frost nips treated with snow, spirits fair. It's a borrowed trick older than anyone present. Rub the white patch with cold snow to coax blood, without burning what feels nothing. Day 1 teaches softly, because you can still learn. Repairs, straps mended, metal oiled, small failures addressed before morning magnifies them. You read faces the way you read weather. Who goes quiet when tired, who watches dogs with respect, and who watches like their gear. A spoon becomes ritual. The body likes ceremony even when it can't explain why. Night draws its curtain. If the aurora visits, it does so without applause. Curtains folding and unfolding in slow intelligence. Inside, flame paints a brief warmer color on canvas that promises nothing and gives exactly that. You make the last audit. Socks dry, boots warmed and stuffed. Mitt liners paired, biscuit in pocket for an unkind dawn. Pencil stub marking the mouth of a story. You tie yourself into your bag. Wool, then windproof. Fur where fur knows its business. The sledge knocks once on the guy line like a polite neighbor. Far off, the ice changes its mind and a low boom travels the flows. A sermon from a cathedral you can't see. Day 1 doesn't end, it recesses. If you wake, you'll taste cold, metallic, faintly sweet, like a coin made of sky, and you'll feel a small, defiant pride at still being here. The Arctic is interviewing you, yes. Your answer today was not eloquent. It was adequate. Up here, that is the highest grade offered. Tomorrow ask a bigger question. Tonight, you have earned the right to be asked. Chapter 2. Rations and Fat. Eating Distance. You don't eat in the Arctic to be full. You eat to move. Calories are not comfort. They are traction. The ledger may track miles and bearings, but the real map is fat flowing through muscle, fire flowing through a stove, and both of them arguing with cold. Start with pemmican, because that's where motion begins. Think of meat dried to stubbornness, brittle, almost musical when snapped. Grind it down until it approaches dust. Warm, rendered fat until it moves like thought. Fold the two together at a ratio your cook guards, like a family secret. If morale permits, a handful of berries is invited to the wedding. Press into bags or blocks. That's your day, compacted. Protein for repair, fat for heat, a small sweetness to remind the tongue it belongs to a person. Pemmican isn't a flavor. It's a distance converted into something chewable. The pot is an altar and a workshop. In goes snow, carefully, seeded first with ice, so you're not performing a magic trick that ends in steam and disappointment. The stove's hiss is the sound of progress pawned at high interest. Add flour to thicken, or hard biscuit hammered into gravel with the back of a knife. The paste that results is faithful rather than charming. If you've sailed with a navy, you might call any hot mash stew. If you've dragged a sledge long enough, you'll call it work. Fat has two jobs, and both are brutal. In the tin, it spares fuel. A pot with grease comes willing to a boil. A pot without sulks and spends your paraffin. In the body, fat is tempo. One steady burn that doesn't abandon you mid-pull. Sugar is a drum roll. Fat is a bass note. You need both, but only one will still be singing 3 hours into a headwind. The cook is not a character, he's doctrine. He measures by the day's plan, not the stomach's complaint. A standard sledge ration. Call it a pound of pemmican, a pound of biscuit. Tea, maybe a whisper of sugar. Looks meager until you learn arithmetic the cold forces on you. Too much and you sweat into your clothes, salting tomorrow's frostbite. Too little and the world narrows to a point that pierces from throat to spine. The right amount lets your pace stay angry instead of desperate. You will meet men who can talk about fat the way sommeliers talk about wine. Seal oil versus tallow. The way bear grease behaves in a pan. The smell of lamp fuel in a house sled after a week of grey daylight. They will tell you that everything takes on the taste of the stove, the canvas, the dogs, the weather. They will not be complaining. They will be locating themselves. Scurvy floats through these meals like a quiet creditor. Logbooks mouth off about discipline. Gums tell the truth. The easy story is citrus. Lime juice makes sailors safe. And it does well at sea when the juice is fresh and the glass is short. Out here, the story edits itself. Bottled virtue spoils, loses nerve. What works is humbler and truer. Fresh meat, taken recently from an animal that already knows how to survive the place you're trespassing. Raw, if you can stand it, and if the elders tell you it's wise. A strip of frozen caribou shaved transparent, snow softened. Narwhal skin with its clean chew. Seal liver, small portions, careful hands, given not as novelty, but as instruction. Vitamins do not read Latin, and they do not care about empire. You learn caution too. Some livers, the great old bears for instance, carry more power than a body can politely receive. Knowledge here is specific, communal, and paid for in years. A generous elder can save a season with a sentence. A proud stranger can ruin one by refusing to listen. Borrowed north isn't poetry. It's logistics. Taste is a travelling rumour. The first bowl of hot pemmican paste tastes like insurance. By week 2, it tastes like a contract you signed in a language you barely read. Men begin to dream in Cook's verbs. Render, stir, scrape, save. They talk about meals they've had in places with chairs and walls. They speak of butter like a person. Sometimes someone remembers vegetables out loud, and the tent goes briefly quiet, as if listening for a ghost's footsteps. Candles appear in this chapter, the way shame appears in diaries, occasionally and with honesty. Tallow is food in disguise. If the day has been a catastrophe, a man will shave a candle into the pot with the mercy of a surgeon. He will pretend not to see anyone noticing. No one will make a joke. Lamps are for light. Tonight, they are for heat you can swallow. Fuel competes with appetite. Every minute the stove burns, the future shrinks a little. Coal, paraffin, driftwood if you're lucky. A separate ledger, heavier than your stomach's book, and less forgiving. This is the arithmetic behind small cups of tea, and the quick hand that snatches the pot from the flame the moment a boil is honest. And behind the cook's ritual scrape, the spoon chasing every glint of grease around tin walls, like a miser teaching thrift to a prodigal flame. Dogs eat, too, and if there are dogs, you will learn their menu by texture. Frozen blocks of meat cut with a hewing rhythm that wrist learns and shoulder resents. A led dog is fed first and watched as a weather sign. When he declines, the day is wrong. When he gulps and looks back at you with working eyes, harness will feel less like apology and more like promise. If there are no dogs, men inherit the calories meant for them, on paper anyway. In practice, men often forget to claim that portion. Pride tastes worse than seal oil going cold. Food is also etiquette. In cramped canvas, you will learn the choreography of bowls and knees, the way to hold a cup so slosh becomes a rumour, the angle of your wrist that keeps grease from your sleeping bag, the tense smell, smoke, leather, wool, wet dog, hot iron, old snow, becomes background music, then home. History fans like to stage a famous line here, eat your boots, and it's no fable. Desperate men have boiled leather, softened it with hope, and called it dinner. The point, though, isn't the romance of suffering, it's the bureaucracy of avoiding it. Proper rations loaded, fuel tallied, the early, unglamorous decision to turn back before the ledger breaks. In heroic paintings, the meal is a campfire halo around brave faces. In real ledgers, the meal is a number that decides whether anyone gets painted later. There are grace notes even here. Cocoa traded out for tea on celebratory nights, and morale rises like steam. A tiny onion, hoarded, diced into fractions so small they become scent more than ingredient, and suddenly the tent remembers cities. Someone saves a sugar lump for a companion's hard day. These gestures are lightweight and heavy at once. They weigh nothing on the sledge and everything in the book of keeping men human. The body, meanwhile, becomes an accountant with opinions. It reports which fats it prefers and which starches insult it. It thanks you for salt like a letter from a friend. It punishes you for eating too fast with a cold that creeps inward and takes a chair. It learns to call hunger by other names. Distance, wind, another ridge. And then, a strange mercy. Palate fatigue plateaus, and the stew that once felt like a dare becomes a rhythm. The spoon turns, the stove ticks. The voices arrange themselves around the pot in an old, comforting geometry. The cook, who has not smiled in 3 days, permits himself the story of the best loaf he has ever seen. Someone falls asleep, holding a cup they will not spill. The tent glows a shade warmer than outside, and no warmer than that, which is precisely enough. If this chapter had a single sentence to carry forward, it would be simple. Fat is miles. Render enough, carry enough, share enough, respect it, and the line you draw across the white will be longer and cleaner. Disrespect it, and the Arctic will take the pencil from your hand with a politeness that feels like indifference. Tomorrow, there will be other questions about sky and magnets and the personality of ice. But tonight, the answer sits in your belly, slow and honest. You have eaten distance. You have banked heat. The ledger closes on a page that smells faintly of tallow and tea. Chapter 3. Wood, Iron and Ice. A ship that tries to live. At the edge of the map, a ship stops being furniture and starts pretending to be an animal. It breathes through seams, eats coal or wind, and flinches when the ice puts a hand on its ribs. Men will swear they hear it speak at night, creaks like old proverbs, knocks like coded prayers. Call it superstition if you like. The hull answers the Arctic in a language older than engines. Begin with wood. Oak for ribs, elm for keels. Dense timbers that remember storms from forests you can walk through in summer. Builders double the skin with doubling planks, lay diagonal riders inside like crossed fingers, bolt iron knees where wood alone would sulk. The bow is reinforced, bluff, muscled, a battering sermon, so it can ride up onto forming ice instead of letting the flow bite straight in. The stem wears an iron shoe. Along the waterline runs sacrificial plating. If anything is going to be chewed, let it be the part that volunteered. Between planks, oakum, hemp teased into hair, hammered with tar until the seams look smug. Caulking is not decoration. It is breath control. Warm day, the tar relaxes and the ship exhales. Cold night, it tightens and the ship inhales through the pumps. That sound in the midwatch, water insinuating, the slow drip into the bilge, is not drama, it's metabolism. Men pump because hearts do. Stop either, and the rest of the story writes itself. Iron arrives like ambition. Straps, bands, frames, knees that don't rot. The yard calls it progress. The ice calls it an appetizer. Iron is strong until it concentrates force. A single squeeze from a moving flow will find the one place where stiffness forgets to bend. That's why the clever ships keep their pride quiet. Strength, yes, but also ways to shrug. A hull that can rise, a rudder that can be hauled up into a well before some wandering berg snaps it like a carrot. A screw propeller on a lifting frame, hoisted out of harm's teeth when the ship goes into winter mode. Sails furled, topmast struck, shrouds snugged, everything tightened down as if tucking in a restless child. Steam is a rumour that becomes a room. Some ships add auxiliary engines, converted from mills or locomotives, so a day of windless, desperate ice picking can end with a few stubborn miles forward. Coal lives in the hold as a black, heavy calendar. Every shovelful is a date you won't get back. Heat from the boiler licks along improvised flues. Frost forms where it can't reach, which is everywhere else. Pipes sweat, breath freezes, bulkheads bloom with hoarfrost roses that men brush away, only to have them return, patient as algebra. Inside, the ship tries to be a town. Officers' cabins parade discipline, charts inked with hopes, sextants polished as if light were a tame animal. The forecastle is a republic of damp wool, wet leather, old smoke, and jokes that are mostly therapy. Hammocks swing in a synchronized skepticism. The galley is the only warm handwriting in the whole building. The stove's iron belly negotiates with coal and air. Pans thud. The cook rules by ladle and stare. Condensation drips in a steady punctuation from beams, ticking time onto sleeping faces. Men wake with hair rhymed white and pretend it's dignity. Above, the rigging plays winter's music. Blocks squeal at a pitch that makes teeth remember their age. Sails take on a glassy stiffness. Canvas that once bloomed now clacks like shutters. The boatswain knows the personalities of lines the way a tavern keeper knows regulars. He oils, splices, curses, and every knot is also a small sermon about tomorrow. And then the ice closes. First it nips. A long, exploratory squeeze. Two flows making each other's acquaintance across your hull. The ship shudders and answers with a groan like a tree in a cold wind. Men go quiet without needing to be told. Then the pressure builds the way a conversation turns into an argument. Incremental, inevitable. A ridge forms along the seam where your plank meets their season. The floes crawl up on each other, white plates climbing, tilting, grinding. The sound arrives through timber into bone. a freighted basso scrape that informs even the teeth. The hull takes it, distributes the insult along knees and riders, asks the iron to help, asks the tar to remember its job. In the log, the officer will write nipped. In his stomach, another word, besieged. With luck, the ship pops free after a day of hawsers, ice saws, and men with poles learning new geometry. Without luck, winter adopts you. Beset, that neat euphemism, means the calendar changes species. You build snow walls along the weather rail to calm wind. You bank the ship in its own insulation. Topmasts come down, running gear is housed. Deck seams get tented against drift. Skylights turn into low constellations of frost. On some days the ice presses a little and the deck lifts half an inch, a whole ship breathing in. On others, it relaxes, and you hear deep below a rifle crack sound as a floe changes its mind. Life aboard a beset ship is a syllabus in maintenance. Pumps at set hours because the bilge believes in gravity more than in your schedule. Rigging paraded, tarred, persuaded to behave. Tools warmed in the pocket before they are asked to be tools. Every hinge oiled, every latch taught manners. Wood that whispers splinter gets a bandage of canvas and paint. The carpenter walks like a doctor doing rounds. He taps, listens, prescribes. Assisted frame here, a doubler there, a prayer where neither will take. He knows where the hull complains in tenor and where it groans in bass, and when one note goes missing, he frowns. Heat is rationed like confession. The stove in the lower deck is stingy by design. Smoke marks mean soot, and soot means lungs that will stage a rebellion in March. Men learn to respect the economy of warm stones wrapped in cloth, of bricks spirited from the galley to drip a little comfort into boots. Ventilation, always the argument, must exist even when it hurts. Air that is too still becomes an accomplice to illness. Air that is too lively steals calories from sleeping ribs. On the rare, bright day, the crew turns outward, and the ship becomes a workshop purely for ice. Saw lines are cut to free the hull, channels hacked to tempt a lead of water into generosity. Anchors are set into holes driven into the flow, ice anchors, toothy and temporary, holding the ship against a wind that wants to educate her. Men haul on warps, the capstan mutters an old chant, and if the flow sighs apart at just the right moment, the bow climbs a little onto the edge. The stern wriggles, and there, just there, the ship remembers what it was built for. Even moored in winter, the ship hunts. Lead lines drop. Soundings come up smudged with mud that tells stories. The naturalist, if there is one, goes quiet with happiness over a jar of unpromising water that contains a universe of life under glass. The surgeon counts gums and fingers, marks where daylight is getting stingier, and prescribes walks on the ice like penance. The purser stares at the coal list and the biscuit list, and invents ways to make numbers breed. The captain looks at the north side of the horizon until it answers or refuses, and writes either result in a hand that chooses understatement. Sometimes, in late season, the ship hears a rumour, a distant boom. The grinding concerto becomes syncopated, and a lane opens, black, slick, miraculous. A lead, someone says, and everyone moves as if the word had gears attached. Boats are lowered into water that smokes where air kneels to it. Lines are paid out. The ship is warped forward past her own prison wall. For an hour she is herself, keel honest, bow awake, rudder listening. Then the lane closes with a shrug and the Arctic says, kindly, try again tomorrow. If the worst happens, and sometimes it does, the ice makes a decision. It lifts the ship until her timbers squeal. twists her along a diagonal she was not introduced to in dockyard school, and then sets her down wrong. Ribs crack, planks spring, the world tilts permanently to starboard. Men stand knee-deep in the one room no ship advertises, the suddenly intimate conversation between sea and cargo. Pumps race, canvas wedges hammer into seams, hands learn a new, frightened fluency. If the bow rises one last time and doesn't come back, the order is short and absolute: abandon. Sledges swallow a ship's life in labelled bundles: chronometers, journals, instruments, medical chest, a Bible or two, the fox portrait that made someone a person at home. Dogs, if there are dogs, are roped ready. A last look along the deck that taught you winter. Then the hull that tried to live becomes something else. A landmark, a coffin, a story told by people who still smell of tar. But most seasons are not calamity. They are attrition. The ship survives by being boring, by lists, by oil, by schedule. She keeps men alive long enough for the weather to remember mercy. When the pack at last rots into pans and the sea relearns how to be wet, the hull loosens its winter jaw, sheds a few paint scales like old skin, and slides, cautious, proud, into her element. Sails climb, lines sing. Iron remembers flexibility. The bow points where notebooks insist it should. And for a day, sometimes two, the ship is not a beleaguered hearth on a frozen plain. She is motion, clean and simple. The men cheer then, properly and without superstition. They are not applauding wood or iron. They are applauding the idea that something built by hands can answer a place that does not care with grace, stubbornness, and a creak that sounds, to tired ears, like gratitude. Chapter 4. When the compass lies and the sextant falls silent. The Arctic is not lost. It just refuses to confirm your location. Down in warmer latitudes, a compass is a polite suggestion, and a sextant is a gentleman's agreement with the sun. Up here, magnetism has a personality, and light has lawyers. Start with the compass. Near the magnetic pole, the needle doesn't point. It tilts, dips, broods. Variation, the angle between magnetic north and true, swings so wildly that yesterday's correction note can become tomorrow's hallucination. The card quivers as if embarrassed to be consulted. You can gimbal the bowl, weight the needle, whisper sweet azimuths. Still, the thing behaves like a poet. Expressive, moody, not actionable. The sextant, meanwhile, wants a horizon. The Arctic wants to remove horizons. In fog, in whiteout, sea and sky settle an old dispute by merging. The line you need to measure against becomes a rumor. Sailors carry an artificial horizon for land work, a shallow tray of dark liquid that mirrors the sky for the sextant's double image. But Mercury, excellent mirror, turns to malevolent jelly below brutal cold. Oil thickens into gloom. You warm the tray in your coat like a pet and walk it out under a wind that hates glass. Frost tries to lace the mirrors. Breath becomes a saboteur. Every sight taken is a small domestic tragedy. Wipe, shelter, steady, pray. Clouds sit tight for days. The sun circles behind linen, and the math that would normally feel like a handshake becomes a blind date. Even when the disk shows, refraction plays tricks. Low on the horizon, the sun is lifted by the cold air, like a coin raised on a string. The angle you read has lies baked into it. Your noon sight, simple at home, turns into an interrogation with an uncooperative star and a conspiring atmosphere. Time, the quiet partner, misbehaves too. On ships, the chronometer lives in a warm box and is treated like a civilian. On the sledge, your chronometer is a pocket watch hidden under layers and breathed on by a moving furnace that is you. Springs sulk in the cold. Lubricants stiffen. Rates wander. You keep the watch near your heart not from sentiment, but for calibration. And even then, you compare it against the officers at halts, as if they were unreliable witnesses. The seconds you lose in a morning become miles of confusion by week's end. So navigation shifts from ceremony to craft. Dead reckoning takes the chair and refuses applause. Heading by will, distance by pace, time by a watch you don't quite trust. On water, you would correct for leeway and current. On pack ice, the whole floor moves. A flow can drift miles while your boots convince you of progress. Men plant poles and later watch their own campsite slide past at a dignified, humiliating speed. Where land is visible, it refuses to stay still, dancing behind mirage layers, looming, sinking, stretching sideways until respectable officers label phantoms as promontories in notebooks because the sky swore it was true. Whiteout is not darkness. It's the murder of contrast. Shadows die, and with them depth. The world becomes the inside of an eggshell. A snow ridge 3 feet high and a valley 10 feet deep broadcast the same information. None. Men stumble into gentle trenches as if falling through grammar. Sastrugi, the wind-carved snow, should help. Long ridges pointing with the storm's prevailing hand. But whiteout edits even that. Experienced travelers go by texture underfoot and wind on cheekbones. In a world without lines, the face becomes a compass rose. Where instruments sulk, memory shows up with a map you didn't draw. Inuit wayfinding is a curriculum of specifics. Read snow's grain, note the angle of sastrugi, the taste of wind off land, the way distant cliffs sound through air. Yes, sound. The ear has cartography when the eye is unemployed. A certain cloud posture means open water. A streak of water sky under low overcast points to a lead. Dog behavior is a barometer. Lead dogs turn heads toward old trails. The team's gait changes a fraction when the surface under the drift thins. This knowledge is local, communal, earned. Expeditions that listen move like they've borrowed wings. Expeditions that don't build cairns for future historians. Ah, cairns, the Arctic's punctuation. A cone of stones on a scar of rock, a bottle or tin inside with a paper that knows its own importance. Routes are written one pile at a time. In the polar night, you find them by feel, by patience, by the way a lump of earth misfits the smooth language of snow. In the midnight sun, you find them by shadow. A slender spike casts longer than you expect, because near the top of the world, the sun keeps arguing about where down is. Sunsticks and shadow tricks have their day. Plant a staff and watch the shadow at local noon. In the north, it points due north-south. Close enough if you accept the atmosphere's slippery ethics. On clear days you keep a sun compass, a small disc marked with hour lines tuned to your latitude, throwing a shadow that becomes a heading. It doesn't care about magnetism's moods and will serve until cloud pulls the curtain. At sea, when leads open, the sky adds theatre. Parhelia, mock suns, sit beside the real one like advisors, halos stack like theology, and everything looks navigational, while advising nothing. You learn to ignore beauty. The eye is greedy for signals. The discipline is to accept how few are true. Night navigation deserves its own small legend. Under aurora, magnets sulk harder. Geomagnetic storms rustle the needle with a bored tail flick. Stars help, but often come veiled, and their angles near the horizon are the same refracted liars the sun keeps. Some parties carry a tiny transit to shoot stars higher up. Most carry patience, which weighs less and breaks less often. Sound is an uncredited guide. On still days you hear surf through miles of cold air, a base rumor that says land is doing violence to water. On others you hear pack ice grinding beyond the next ridge, and you decide that your line can afford a parable about detours. Even smell has a vote. Brine in fog means open water. A clean, mineral dryness suggests land ice ahead. The senses assemble a council and for once agree. What keeps all this from becoming guesswork is order. The boring, heroic kind. Bearings are recorded at halts even when nobody trusts them. Pace counts are muttered and tallied. Drift is estimated off flag poles. When the sun shows for 1 clean minute, watches come out, sextants rise, hands go steady, and one angle, re-enters the notebook like rain after a long sermon on drought. It won't save you alone. It doesn't have to. It stitches to yesterday's numbers and tomorrow's observations and makes a cloth that, from a distance, looks exactly like knowing where you are. So yes, the compass lies. The sextant falls silent. The watch forgets itself. But the expedition continues because navigation here is not a single instrument. It is a coalition. Magnet, sun, wind, snow, dog, ear, habit, humility. On the good days, all of them vote in the same direction. On the bad days, you appoint dead reckoning as chair and add only as much hope as the sled can carry. And when at last you step onto rock that agrees to stay where it is, open the cairn and slide your note inside, your handwriting is tidy. Not because you were certain, because you were careful. Up here, careful is the nearest synonym for true. Chapter 5. Sledges, Dogs, Men. The Ethics of Haulage. A sledge is a sentence written on snow. The grammar is simple. Runners, crosspieces, lashings. But the meaning is heavy. Food, fuel, shelter, notebooks, hope. It looks like wood and rope. It behaves like a promise. Get the promise wrong, and the day becomes an apology. Start with the wood. Ash or birch bends without sulking. Oak is strong but too proud. Better in ships than on snow. Good sledges are stitched, not nailed. Rawhide lashings and scarf joints that let the frame flex when the surface argues. Runners wear bone, horn, or steel shoes, polished with a candle or rubbed with ice until they shine like intent. Crosspieces are spaced to keep bags from sagging into the voids where friction multiplies. The tow line attaches low. The hauling point spreads so the sledge follows, not fights. Every knot is a clause. Every lashing a conjunction that keeps the paragraph coherent over bad grammar. Sastrugi, rubble, soft drifts. Load it wrong and the sledge tattles. Heavy high means a capsize at the first ridge. Fragile outside means breakage disguised as surprise. Veterans pack to a diagram the way a surgeon lays out instruments. Fuel tins at the keel, dense ballast. Food bags midships in match pairs for balance. Tent, stove, and medical chest where hands can find them fast. Instruments wrapped as if brass could feel. Spare runners slung beneath like reserve verbs. Lashings crossed and tightened in a sequence that looks like choreography because it is. A good load doesn't rattle. It thumps once and then agrees to travel. Now decide who pulls. If there are dogs, they are colleagues, not equipment. Teams can be arranged in a fan, each line splayed from the sledge, good over sea ice where crevasses play fewer tricks, or in tandem pairs on a central gangline, better for narrow trails and disciplined curves. Either way, the language is short and not up for debate. A lead dog earns the front because the others believe him, not because a human appointed him. He reads the day through pads and knows. Thin ice has a taste. Old trails have a memory. A bad decision has a sound. Commands are mostly vowels clipped by wind. The rest is posture. A twitch of the leader's ear is grammar. The team speaks fluently. Harnesses matter. A breastband harness lets a dog push with chest and shoulders, easy to put on with mittened hands and kind to tracheas. X-back harnesses pull from the whole body, efficient and, if fitted wrong, unforgiving. Traces must be equal or the team learns resentment. Next lines keep order without strangling dignity. Whips exist, but the best drivers use them as pens, not punishments. A crack in air, a line under a word. Real control comes from fairness and tempo. Dogs can count distance the way people count minutes. Cheat them, and they look back with a math teacher's disappointment. Feeding is policy, not generosity. A hard-run team eats fat-rich meat that holds heat in the body, served frozen in blocks, cut by a rhythm the wrist learns and the shoulder complains about. Lead dogs are fed first, not as royalty, but as forecast. Appetite is a barometer. Water is food, so snow is melted before meals, even when fuel is stingy. Salt whispers through the ration because muscles understand it. On storm-stayed days, dogs eat less and sleep more, nose to tail, breathing one another's thrift. Care is the other half of speed. Paws are inspected like passports. Splayed nails, ice balls between toes. Cuts that will become next week's failures if not bandaged now. A dab of seal oil or fat softens skin the way good news softens faces. Harness rubs get fur trimmed and skin salved. People who think speed is pulled out of dogs miss that speed is pulled out of evenings. The quiet half hour when the driver checks every pad, rubs every shoulder, and the whole team learns that tomorrow will be asked only of bodies that were respected today. If there are no dogs, the pronoun changes, not the work. Men wear shoulder slings that bite less than waist belts in broken country. Cotton webbing if they're lucky. Rope if they're historical. Hauling is legs first, back rarely, arms almost never. The pace is a human metronome. Slow enough to avoid sweat that will freeze into treachery. Fast enough to stay slightly angry. Teams rotate positions, front, middle, rear, so no one eats snow forever or walks in easy rails all afternoon. The language is shorter than with dogs. Mostly, it's breathing, and the scrape of runners, and one word that means lift in whatever nation the expedition claims. Relays are logistics wearing snowshoes. Heavy loads advance in stages, half forward, half left behind under a flagged wand. So a mile becomes 3 and the day becomes honest. Depots are the bank accounts of the trail. Food cached under a cairn of snow blocks. A tin note inside with dates and directions. The top disguised from gulls and mercy. To travel the Arctic is to leave crumbs for your own future self, and to hope weather doesn't hire thieves. Bridges are built where the ice makes jokes. Snow spans crevasses and then forgets it promised to hold. The first puller probes with a staff, reads hollow from solid by the language transmitted through wood into bone. Ropes are worn high and a little slack, enough to catch, not enough to yank. When a sledge breaks through to the axle and hangs there like a bad decision, a good team becomes a machine. 2 men anchor, 2 men pry. 1 manages lines, 1 manages panic. If there are dogs, they learn to lean back in chorus on the command that means all together now, and the sledge climbs out on a sound everyone remembers in their ribs. Ethics enters where calories end. History makes us look at Amundsen and Scott and count dogs against miles, bullets against loyalties. The part worth stealing for today is simpler. Respect what works and admit when you are borrowing. Inuit drivers taught harness that didn't strangle, schedules that match climate, rations that match work, routes that match safety rather than pride. Europeans who listened got home with journals and fingers. Those who didn't build shrines to bravery where a few afternoons of humility would have been cheaper. Yes, there were days when dogs were shot to feed men and other dogs, a fact best told without theatre and remembered without smugness. Better ethics live upstream, load less, plan better, turn back sooner. Don't use animals to launder human vanity. The North is not impressed by noble suffering, and it refuses to notarize martyrdom. It signs off on order and thrift. Haulage has politics even inside the tent. Who eats first? Who pulls longest? Who gets the lead position, in dogs or in men? Where the work is hardest and the view does nothing but lie. Good leaders rotate misery and call it fairness. Bad ones centralize it and call it leadership. Dogs detect both. So do men, though men pretend longer. There's ceremony too. Knots learned in summer feel different at 30 degrees, and the man who can tie a bowline with mitts earns a particular respect. The ritual of unrigging at day's end, lines flaked dry, traces coiled, harness hung where frost won't turn leather into glass, decides tomorrow's miles before anyone sleeps. A driver who sleeps near the team and wakes when one dog whines in dreams carries a kind of quiet authority that doesn't need volume. We should talk about noise. The trail is full of it. Runner squeal, dog talk, wind flirting with canvas. But the noise that matters is the small complaint that changes yesterday to today. A new creak in the sledge frame, a click in a dog's gait, the thin tear in a trace. Fix them now and they are anecdotes. Ignore them and they are chapters. And then there's joy, thin but bright, a fresh crust that holds. A long, smooth tongue of blue ice where the team runs like grammar finally clicking. A tail flagging in contentment. The shrug of a sledge that says in wood, yes. The miles melt without drama. No one will paint this day. Those are the best days. By evening, the ethics of haulage have turned into small courtesies. Dogs fed before men because they have fewer ways to understand planning. Men fed before talk because talk will happen anyway. A pat for the leader that isn't sentimental, just informed. A last hand on the runner to feel heat in the grain. A craftsman's reflex, checking for tomorrow. Then canvas, stove, grease, the old choreography. If this chapter keeps one lesson, keep it low and central like a fuel tin. Pull fairly or don't pull far. Balance the load. Respect the bodies that move it. Borrow the methods of people who learned here without notebooks. And remember that a sledge is not only wood on snow. It is an agreement among materials, animals, and intentions about how to move through a place that does not care. Honor that agreement, and the line you draw across the white won't just be long. It will be decent. Chapter 6. Borrowed North. Inuit Knowledge and the Cost of Not Listening. Exploration stories like to cast the Arctic as a blank. It isn't. It's annotated by footsteps, by caches, by words that fit snow more precisely than snow. The first expeditions arrived with charts and ceremony, then discovered they had come to a library without learning the language. What they called discovery was often a late enrollment in somebody else's graduate course. Begin with clothing, because survival starts at the skin. European wool is brave, caribou skin is intelligent. Wool stores sweat until it turns to glass against the ribs. Caribou, hollow-haired, moves moisture outward and traps warm air close. An anorak with a good hood makes wind into suggestion. A fur ruff quiets spindrift, the way a hand hushes a child. Parka over inner parka, mitt over liner, boot over dry grass or felt, layering as grammar rather than fashion. The mukluk's soft sole lets the foot read terrain and avoid sweat trapping. These are not costumes. They're theses defended against weather. Expeditions that adopted them with respect lasted longer. Those that wore wool as a worldview wrote stoic diary entries and frostbite reports. Shelter next. A snow house is not a stunt. It's a heat management system. Blocks cut with a snow knife spiraled into a vault that asked the wind to go around rather than through. The entrance is a cold trap. The sleeping platform is a warm declaration. A thin pane of freshwater ice for a window. Daylight admitted. Heat mostly refused. Breath rhymes the ceiling. A quick pass with the lamp tempers it back into glaze. In summer, skin tents learn the opposite lesson. Let everything breathe, or pay in mildew and sick lungs. Some expeditions insisted on canvas and corners because civilization likes right angles. Others learned to let shape be dictated by the air. Guess which saved fuel and tempers. Travel, the kamutik, a sledge that knows how to shrug. Runners are shod not with iron, but with bone or frozen freshwater ice. Lashed rather than nailed, so the frame flexes over bad snow. Crosspieces are pegged in a rhythm that reads like poetry once your hands know it. On sea ice, the traces spread in a fan so dogs can read and avoid thin patches with their own decisions. Overland, paired lines keep a trail precise. The whip is punctuation, not punishment. Most sentences are written with voice and fairness. A driver worth following is part meteorologist, part psychologist, fully accountant of distance. He rotates dogs as if balancing a ledger. He feeds lead first because appetite forecasts tomorrow. Wayfinding is a curriculum with many teachers. The sky offers water sky, dark streaks under cloud where open water reflects its mood. The land offers ice blink, a pale wash above pack. Sastrugi wear the wind's signature. Their sharp face says where last gale slept. A ridge of snow on the lee of a low rock tells you how often that rock is asked to explain itself to air. The ear collects maps too. Surf mutters across miles of cold air when land is near. Pack ice grinds when a lead is closing. Dog paws change vowel on thin ice. Even smell votes. Brine says open water. Clean, iron-cold air says land-fast ice. None of these are instinct. They're data, with centuries of peer review. Food is not cuisine, it's chemistry. Bottled citrus travels poorly and lies as it ages. Fresh meat, taken from animals who solved winter long ago, brings what bodies need without fanfare. Raw slivers of caribou shaved translucent. Seal liver in careful amounts, shared with the exactness of a lesson. Narwhal skin, clean and firm. Outsiders called it savage until their gums loosened and the lesson stopped being theoretical. The rule is simple. Vitamins don't care about your flag. The caution is simple too. Not all livers are kindness. Knowledge here arrives with footnotes. Ask before eating like a hero. Timing is knowledge disguised as patience. Sea ice has a gate. Freeze, thicken, grow restless, rot. Travel windows are not suggestions. They are doors that shut. Inland, rivers offer highways only when the cold has taught them silence. Migratory arcs are calendars you can eat. Caribou here, seals then. Expeditions that listened moved like inuktitut verbs, tense, aspect, and intention aligned. Expeditions that imposed their own schedule were graded by weather. Work is repair performed early. A boot seam worried in camp is a foot saved on the trail. A runner relashed at dusk is a sledge that doesn't throw you into a new religion at noon. Needles ride in hats, thread in mid seams. A spare thong in a pocket is the difference between a stop and a story. The North pays interest on thrift. It also finds vanity. Maps. The foldable kind aren't wrong. They're incomplete. The best diagrams live in the head and the mouth. A string of place names linked by how the land behaves. This bay breathes with tide in winter. That cape lies to the wind. Those pressure ridges will likely reform where the current argues with the shoal. A cairn is a paragraph. A cache is a comma. A remembered skyline is a library catalogued by angle and weather. Outsiders who drew straight lines across this grammar learned that straight lines are rude. Trade is how knowledge pays rent. Fur and metal, needles and tea, stories for stories. Good exchange keeps names out of angry books. Bad exchange, taking methods without credit, food without gratitude, poisons roots for years. There are ledgers you can't see. The entries are who you bothered to thank, who you bothered to learn from, who you bothered to pay. Language matters. Eskimo pie sells. Thank you feeds. A borrowed word spoken carefully can open a cache of advice you didn't know existed. Mispronounced arrogance closes it. Translators are lifelines, bridge builders who deserve first call on warm tea and last word on plans. Many expeditions credited their instruments more than their interpreters. Many expeditions wrote neat death sentences in neat hands. The cost of not listening shows up as drama that could have been logistics. Sledges built stiff because stiffness felt like strength. Runners bite and shatter at the first field of sastrugi. Canvas tents pitched square into wind because symmetry felt civilized. Spindrift writes its own essay inside your blankets. Wool socks worn to heroic damp because dryness felt timid. Frostbite composes an obituary in your toes. Dogs underfed because men couldn't count fat correctly. Miles vanish. Pride substitutes for map and arrives on time for the funeral. Listening isn't surrender. It's specification. Borrow a parka. Pay for it, with goods and with thanks. Borrow a route. Write it down with the name of the person who gave it. Borrow a diet. Stop calling it strange after it prevents your teeth from coming out. Borrow a schedule. Change your ceremony to fit it. The North notices. There is ethics inside the borrowing. Don't extract knowledge like ore. Don't treat guides as disposable contrast in your hero portrait. Put their names in the book where you put latitudes. Pay fairly without condescension. Share food before advice. Learn enough words to apologize properly. Bring back stories that don't flatten people into props. Which isn't to say all exchanges were gentle. Contact arrived carrying wars and microbes and paperwork. The ledger is messy. But within that mess, the rules of survival stayed steady. Credit, care, humility, specificity. When Europeans listened, the North became a teacher and a partner. When they didn't, the North became an editor, and it cut their paragraphs. Even the sky has a lesson about borrowing. Travelers use the water sky under clouds to find leads. That's borrowing light. They set snow houses with doors away from prevailing wind. That's borrowing air's personality. They lash sledges to bend, not to fight. That's borrowing physics. Every smart decision begins with the sentence, "The place is already right. I must learn to be compatible." By evening, in a well-borrowed camp, small courtesies prove the point. Dogs eat first because they worked hardest and understand schedules less. A sliver of fat goes to the person who taught you a new knot. The snow knife is cleaned and placed where a hand in the dark can find it. Someone sets the kettle slightly off the hottest part of the stove to save fuel, because tomorrow is greedy. Stories travel about a lead that opens where the water sky lies, about a man who ignored the wind and paid tuition. Keep a single sentence from this chapter and tape it to the inside of your hood. You do not conquer a place you borrow from. Pay in attention. Pay in credit. Pay in the unglamorous currency of doing things the way they already work here. The Arctic will not thank you, but it will, sometimes, let you pass. Chapter 7. Scurvy, frostbite, sleep. Repairing the body where time breaks. The Arctic breaks you slowly, and then all at once. The slowly is a ledger of small deficits, vitamins, warmth, rest. The all at once is a finger that goes white, a cough that digs in, a mind that forgets why it stood up. Repair here is not heroics, it's administration. Keep the accounts honest, and the body will keep signing your travel papers. Scurvy, the quiet mutiny. Scurvy does not arrive waving flags. It whispers. First, a tiredness that sleep does not correct. Then gums that sulk and bleed at the least excuse. Old scars turn theatrical. Healed skin reddens, aches, as if the past were being renegotiated. Wounds that ought to close rehearse their lines and refuse the curtain. Teeth loosen like employees updating resumes. The cause is not cold or misery. It is chemistry. Vitamin C is a tool the body uses to stitch collagen, the mortar between bricks. Withdraw the tool and the walls remember gravity. The cures that work are older than the ships that carried guesses north. Fresh meat and certain raw tissues from animals that solved winter long ago. Caribou, eaten soon after the chase. Seal liver, portioned carefully and shared like a lesson. Narwhal skin, clean and firm. These are not romantic details, they're procurement notes. Bottled citrus helps when it's honest and fresh, but glass and months are not friends, and preserved virtue loses nerve. The expeditions that listened to local knowledge found their gums willing to be reasonable. Those that didn't wrote sad entries in neat hands. Prevention is a schedule, not a miracle. Rotate fresh into the ration whenever the window opens. Don't cook vitamins to death out of fear of raw. Don't let pride outrank appetite. A cook who can smuggle chemistry into taste. The thin stew moment when a sliver of liver becomes rumor more than ingredient is worth a promotion. The first man who says his gums hurt buys you time to save everyone else. Believe him. Frostbite, the abrupt editor. Frostbite begins where circulation is a luxury. Fingers, toes, ears, nose, cheeks. Cold takes sensation first, then color. The white patch looks scandalously clean. Dead ivory against living red. Numbness is not mercy. It is a cover story. The rulebook here is brief. Prevention outranks cure. Dry stays, wet lies. Swap socks before the foot files a complaint. Keep boots roomy enough for blood to do its rounds. Tight is betrayal disguised as order. Vent sweat before it freezes you from within. Fur ruffs and windproof shells are not fashion, but policy. At first nip, treat cold with cold. Rub gently with snow, not with hands fresh from the stove. You are not warming. You are coaxing blood back without burning insensible skin. Heat later, carefully, when feeling returns and the patch repents. Never thaw what might refreeze. The cruel truth, a part warmed at noon and refrozen at 4 is worse off than if you had left it cold. If travel conditions threaten a second freeze, insulate and keep moving. Don't perform a well-intended amputation with kindness. Hands are tools. Guard them like instruments. Mitts over liners. Tasks organized so bare fingers come out for seconds, not minutes. Pre-tie cords, stage gear. Learn the feel of your knots blind so the wind can't pass sentence. When the damage is done, triage is humble. Dry, elevate, pad, protect. Pop blisters cleanly only when they threaten to freeze and shatter. Otherwise, respect the body's packaging. Infection is the opportunist in this chapter. Keep dirt and dog, stove soot and glove fuzz out of wounds. The medic's kit is a compromise. Iodine that doesn't freeze, bandages that do. Morphine measured with the caution of someone who hopes to need it again. Record every case in the ledger because patterns teach faster than lectures. Hypothermia, the slow thief. You can be hypothermic and still clever enough to deny it. The signs are unromantic. A sloppy pace, easy mistakes, jokes that miss their landing pad. Shivering is a feature, not a failure. When shivering stops and the sufferer goes dreamy, the bill has arrived. Fixes live upstream. Keep people not wet. Keep calories moving. Keep wind managed. Downstream, move fast, but not theatrically. Windproof shell on, sugar now. Fat next, stove lit. Dry layers staged like a drill. Do not roast a cold person over zeal. Rewarm the core first. Skin to skin inside a bag is not scandal. It's engineering. Respiratory trouble, lungs on strike. The ship's stove and the tent sputter conspire against lungs. Soot writes its handwriting in bronchi. Coughs become policies. Ventilation feels like betrayal. But stale air is an accomplice to illness. Make a gap. Lift a skirt of canvas. The flame will sulk and the bodies will thank you. Snow houses are instructors here. A small vent high, a cold trap low. A lamp that does not ask for all the oxygen. At -50, the air itself is abrasive. Scarves and hoods are filters as much as warmth. Eyes and light, blindness that isn't dark. Snow blindness is sunburn on your corneas. Bright pain, grit feel, tears that don't soothe. Sunglasses aren't style, they're warranties. If glasses fail you, lost, broken, fogged, a slit cut in a scrap of leather or bark will turn agony into vision. Shade lamps with sense. Light is medicine until it isn't. Under aurora, magnets play tricks. Under midnight sun, sleep forgets to visit. Which brings us to the most argued medicine on the trail. Sleep, the repair you keep trying to postpone. Sleep is not a treat at the end of a productive day. It is the maintenance window without which tomorrow voids your warranty. Men who boast of 4 hours is plenty grow sloppy with knots, lazy with socks, and heroic with funerals. The choreography of making sleep is survival. A platform of snow that won't sag into a cold bath. A bag that stays dry because you aired it at noon. A routine that turns two bodies into one warm system without ceremony. Back to back, knee against calf. All those dull, efficient arrangements the living prefer over poetry. Tea before bed helps, but sugar right before sleep wakes you cruelly. Fat an hour earlier will keep the furnace honest. In polar night, circadian rhythm wanders off. Rebuild it on purpose. A set hour for the last hot drink. The same order of tasks. The same jokes. Jokes can be scheduled. The same prayer if that's your idea of counting. A watch rotates through the tent. One man keeps the stove from sulking. One listens to the dogs. One checks the aurora as if it were news. Insomnia happens. The rule is gentle. If you can't sleep, you guard someone else's. Mend a strap. Sharpen a snow knife. Write the log. Don't share your wakefulness like a cold. Small medicine, big miles. A half hour at evening saves days in spring. Trim the toenail that will cut its neighbor under thick socks. Tape the heel that thinks it's special. Massage life back into a dog's wrists, and you'll buy tomorrow's pace at a discount. Wash what you can where you can. Skin under siege becomes treason if ignored. Brush teeth even when water is grudged. Your mouth is a wound waiting to happen. A clean spoon is not fussy. It's contagious fewer times. The mind needs stitching too. The North edits bravado into silence, and silence into gloom, unless you give it a counterweight. The counterweight is small work and shared narrative. The cook asks someone to tell the story of the best loaf they ever saw. The medic teaches a knot. The officer reads 3 lines from the log aloud like a weather report for the soul. Progress moderate, dogs good, men better. Games that fit pockets, a pencil, a tiny deck, a riddle. Laughter is not leakage. It is fuel efficiency for sanity. So is a rule that the worst day earns the first and hottest cup. When repair fails, sometimes the ledger turns red. A frostbitten toe blackens. A cough becomes blood. A mind goes snow quiet and stands up without its reasons. Here the Arctic is a strict teacher. Turn back is not defeat, it is scholarship. Depots you laid wisely become rescue. Dogs that ate first bring you home. Notes left in cairns prove you existed in a way illness cannot erase. If this chapter needs a single sentence to travel with you, let it be practical and unpoetic. Treat bodies like gear and gear like bodies, dry, fed, inspected, repaired early. The only romance that survives here is competence. Do today's boring care, and tomorrow will let you try again. Ignore it, and the North will grade you with finality. Chapter 8. White darkness, weather, sky, and nerve as navigation. Weather in the Arctic isn't scenery. It's management by other means. You don't glance up to see if it will rain on lunch. You audit the sky the way you count fuel tins, with a suspicion that something is already missing. Pressure falls like a trapdoor. Wind decides ethics, and light writes lies that your instruments repeat with confidence. To move at all, you learn to treat the atmosphere as a colleague with moods and a memory for insults. Morning begins with glass. The barometer sits on its shelf like an accountant who has seen too much. A slow drift downward is a rumor. A quick slide is a subpoena. Men who tried to keep their planned mileage in the face of a plunging needle ended up digging for their tent door by evening. Prudence is not cowardice, it's speed preserved. Cut distance early, bank hot water, stage extra anchors, lash what will later pretend to fly. The discipline feels theatrical when the world still looks polite. By noon, when the horizon folds into itself and the snow becomes a verb, the earlier caution reads like intelligence. Wind supplies the punctuation. At 20, it edits posture. At 40, it edits character. A light air makes lace of your breath. A fresh breeze makes glass of your face. A hard blow makes philosophy of your plans. It carves sastrugi into low, hard ridges, sharp face-up wind, long tail leeward, that tell you where last week slept. You steer by their grammar. Cross them at an angle or pay in shin, dog, and patience. Learn the sound of wind over a crust that will hold and over a crust that lies. Both whistle, but the second has a hiss that ends in apology. A team that keeps its nerve in crossgus is half fed by trust. The driver keeps a tempo that avoids sweat. The dogs keep a line that avoids panic. And nobody fights the air with heroics that become hypothermia. Light is worse than wind because it smiles while stealing. Whiteout is not darkness. It is the murder of contrast. The world stays bright, even cheerful, and removes depth. A 3-foot ridge and a 10-foot hollow give you the same report, harmless. You walk into both with equal confidence and learn humility at the same speed. Men tie themselves to the sledge not for safety, but for sentence structure. The rope keeps the group grammatically related. Step by step, the body becomes a navigator. Boots read texture where eyes fail. Powder over old crust, drift with hollow under it, the soft hum of new snow that has not yet learned to lie. The face becomes a compass when the sun is a rumour. Cheekbones report wind shift before flags do. Clouds sit like lawyers between you and certainty. Thin veils toss halos around the sun and offer spectacles that advise nothing. Overcast lowers until the sky is a ceiling you could reach with a mitten. And then a trick appears at the edge. A strip of darker grey that is not shadow but reflection. Water sky, the old hands say, and turn toward it to find open leads. The opposite, ice blink, throws a pale wash under the cloud and points you to pack. The names sound like folklore. They are instruments that never freeze. The horizon itself is unreliable at low sun. Refraction lifts it like stage scenery. The sextant will measure angels and deliver gossip. You learn to triangulate with what you smell, what you hear, and what the dogs decide without asking. Sound carries here as if air had been taught manners. On a still day, you can hear surf across miles, a baseline that tells you land is doing violence to water. Pack ice grinding beyond a pressure ridge offers a continuous sermon in minor key, far, near, closing. Even silence has dialects. The good, crisp quiet of high pressure clicks in your nose and makes snow sing under runners. The bad, cotton quiet before a storm deadens edges and tells dogs to nap now, because later will be dishonest. The sky becomes a clock that refuses to keep hours. Midnight sun grinds down circadian rhythm until men forget the difference between diligence and mania. You must invent darkness with habits. Tea at the same notional time, the last task performed in the same order. A joke at the same place in the routine, a lamp shaded the same way. Polar night courts a different ruin. Work shrinks to the circle of the stove and minds spiral inward. Then the aurora arrives and pretend reads the compass with green fingers. Nobody applauds. Magnets are already having a mood. You admire with a closed mouth and stick to your pace count. When weather goes actively impolite, nerve takes a chair and speaks softly. A real blow starts with hints, the wind backing half a point, spindrift lifting from the surface in long, low smears, cloud base lowering until even the dogs squint. Then the world accelerates. Drift isn't falling. It's flying sideways, a horizontal river that erases detail into a moving wall. You shorten the caravan to arm's length. Poles mark a perimeter you can retrieve each other from. The tent goes up lower than you like. The snow wall around it grows higher than you've ever considered reasonable. The guy lines hum like wires on a bad telegraph. Inside, the stove's tick becomes policy, and so does silence. Stories come out as if paying rent. The log gets written because writing is a way of tying down the day. Out there, the drift builds a second counterfeit earth. In the morning, you dig as if discovering a lost civilization, and it turns out to be your own. Between storms, the sky throws theatre. Parhelia hang mock suns beside the real one. Halos stack like architectural drawings. Pillars glitter where ice crystals turn air into a chandelier. You learn to look and not be seduced. Beauty is a wonderful liar. If it does not move a sledge or point a safe mile, you put it in the notebook and ignore it with respect. The best navigators are ruthless magpies. They steal only the glints that spend. The itinerary of a day ultimately belongs to pressure, wind, and nerve. Sometimes the wise choice is to bank miles because the glass rose a hair and the sastrugi are kind. Sometimes the wise choice is to make camp in noon brightness because the edge of the sky has that woolly look, and the dogs, who do not pretend at foresight, begin circling into sleep before commands. Trust, but not mysticism. The team is a sensor array with fur, and the place has been teaching them longer than you. Listening is not romance, it is speed later. When the weather gives a gift, you act like you deserve it, and like you don't. A lead opens slick and black. Boats slide, lines pay out. The ship warps forward through its prison. A clear noon arrives. Sextants rise. Watches come out of warm pockets. An angle drops into the log like a clean nail. A high, hard dome returns at midnight. Stars step onto the stage and behave. You take the gift without speeches. Tomorrow is a cynic. By evening, the tent tells you the truth the sky pretended to bury. If the day was good, there is a small, unconscious looseness in shoulders. If it was bad, even laughter sits closer to the floor. Either way, weather has written itself into you. Salt crust feathered on a hood, a rectangle of sunburn where goggles slipped, a hoarfrost halo around a dog's whiskers, a new line in the officer's face that won't leave when you return to cities. The ledger closes with a short note that means more than it says. Wind veered WNW, drift moderate, travel fair afternoon. The rest is implied. What you spared, what you dared, what you learned to ignore. If the Arctic grants one consistent lesson about sky and nerve, it is that certainty is a luxury and care is a skill. You will never be sure. You can always be prepared. Read the glass, read the wind, read the light, and then mistrust it. Read the dogs most of all. And when white darkness arrives, bright, depthless, persuading, you keep moving only as far as your judgment stays warm. Beyond that, you don't march. You wait, and you live to march tomorrow. Chapter 9. Ledgers, Discipline, Mutiny. Keeping order at the edge. At the edge of the map, order is not a virtue, it's heat. The difference between a list and chaos is the difference between steam in a tin and frost on a lung. Expeditions that survive write everything down. Miles, meals, nails, moods. The North is a bad archivist. Paperwork is how you teach tomorrow who you were. The day starts with the ledger. Not the grand narrative, just columns. Biscuit, pemmican, fuel, dog feed, lamp oil. Issued, remaining, expected burn. The purser's pencil is a metronome. The page is a thermostat. He doesn't hoard. He translates appetite into distance. Beside him, another book. Men, dogs, sickness, shoes, straps to mend, fingers to watch, frost nips logged like minor crimes. The officer adds a third, bearings, weather, drift. In cities, writing is memory. Here, writing is infrastructure. Discipline is the choreography that keeps those ledgers honest. Bells on a ship, shouts on the trail. Either way, the day is cut into tidy pieces. Turnout, boots, snow to water, water to tea, sledges, harness, check lines, march on the hour, halt on the quarter. Lunch is a number, not a feast. Camp by the sky's opinion, not the clock's feelings. Small duties get ceremonial. The stove is assigned like a sacred object. The watch is posted even when nothing moves but air. The dogs are counted aloud because numbers are a language that keeps fear grammatical. Punishment exists, but it is an admission of failure. The best leaders spend their authority upstream, not downstream. They rotate misery. Who leads into the wind? Who sleeps near the door? Who goes first across the questionable bridge? They eat the same ration, wear the same disappointment, stand the same length in the cold while the tent goes up last. Men notice injustice faster than danger. Dogs do too. A driver who feeds himself before his team will find lines slackening on tomorrow's hill. An officer who guards the good fur for himself loses a mile a day in patience. Fairness is not a philosophy, it's miles. Still, men are not machines, and neither are their tempers. Mutiny here seldom arrives with knives and speeches. It begins in softer fonts. the silence that grows bark, the joke that lands sharp, the ration scale misremembered by a man who believes he earns more hunger than his neighbor. Petty theft is the Arctic's most expensive crime. A sugar lump pocketed becomes a reason to mistrust all spoons. Logs are the antidote. Scales are brought into the open. The cook counts aloud. The purser lets anyone watch the tally. Transparency is calorie positive. There are older punishments. A reduction of ration, disastrous. You don't discipline a man by making his fingers more likely to stop being fingers. Extra duty, useful, if it is real work, and not humiliation. Confinement, possible on a ship, ridiculous in a tent. Flogging lingers in some navies' paperwork long after it leaves practice. Even the cruel understand that bruises are heat wasted. The harshest penalty the North itself imposes is this. The group that cannot trust itself travels slower than weather. Religion and ritual do useful work where law ends. Sunday service on deck, if there is a deck. A psalm in the tent. A moment with a lamp turned low while someone reads from a book, worn thin by other winters. It isn't piety that keeps order. It's synchronized breathing. The ear learns the sound of many lungs agreeing. After prayer comes play. Theatricals staged on a main deck banked with snow. Comic operas with beards for wigs and officers cheerfully mocked. Lectures in the mess where the naturalist or the carpenter becomes a professor. A spelling bee judged by a bosun who can't spell but can keep score. Laughter is the only ration that grows when spent. Education is discipline disguised as kindness. A captain who teaches sextant work to a clever seaman gives him a second life. A surgeon who trains a boy to dress a frostbite earns a dozen fingers that won't blacken later. Men who see their names in the book as something other than able-bodied travel better. Promotions in miniature, assistant dog driver, keeper of the lamp, cost nothing, and buy a winter. The chain of command must bend without breaking. Orders have to be short enough to survive wind and long enough to carry respect. Make a lane is better than try your best. Turn back must be an order that can be given by any voice when the snow decides to argue. Good captains delegate authority to the weather's shortest witness. Bad captains centralize it and sleep through warnings told by dogs and knees. The great mutinies are famous because they are theatrical. The common ones are dangerous because they are plausible. A man forgets to air his bag and blames the damp on the stove. A driver loses count and feeds lead a double share. A sledge crew slips 5 pounds of personal sentiment into the load. Letters, a trinket, a book, and then resents the hill for remembering. Leaders manage this not with speeches, but with inventory made friendly. Weigh bags in public. Praise lightness like heroism. Replace sentiment with a duty that has a name. Keeper of the chronometer box will carry fewer novels. Petitions have their place. When the ship is beset, officers publish the plan. Coal per day, candles per night, fresh meat when possible, exercises at these hours, school at that one. Men sign, a small social contract written against the cold. It's not democracy. It's consent that buys obedience cheaply. If the plan changes, and it will, the reason is read aloud over tea. Information is discipline's cheapest tool. Records travel outward as well as inward. Care notes are composed with politeness, even when the author suspects he won't read anyone else's reply. To whoever follows, the tone matters. Panic writes poorly. Order writes legibly. In spring, parties fan out to deposit messages along likely routes. A postal service paid in frostbite and hope. The ship may die, the letters must not. On return, those notes become evidence that discipline was more than a rumor. Death is the strictest auditor of order. The protocol is short and merciful. No theatrics, no delay. A sewn canvas, a prayer, a note in the book, a mark on the map. Grief is private in places this bright and this small. Mourning is discipline too. The day must proceed with the same beats, or it will never regain its rhythm. Later, in the quiet, the captain writes to a mother with the exact number of kind truths and the exact omission of cruel ones. He includes a line about bravery because the living need a particular story to sleep. He includes the coordinates because facts keep faith. Morale is not happiness, it's agreement. It grows from obvious justice, equal rations by scale, equal exposure by rotation, equal praise by name. It also grows from the small freedoms a leader can afford. Let men tinker, carve a sledge handle to fit a hand, braid a new trace, recut a hood the way a caribou would apologize to wind. The North likes competence more than conformity. A crew that is allowed to become good at the place becomes better at listening to one another. Alcohol is a footnote worth small ink. The tot on special days warms nothing but argument. Most thoughtful captains keep it for survival medicine and the grammar of celebration. Drunk men are weather you cannot forecast. If a toast must be drunk, it is drunk in measured syllables and followed by work. Nothing disciplines spirits like a task that will punish sloppiness with the exactness of ice. And what of the leader? He is ledger and theatre both. He writes the dull numbers and he stages the bright pretenses that keep them tolerable. He knows every dog by name and every man by gait. He listens to the cook as if calories had opinions. He accepts advice from the carpenter on wood, from the surgeon on lungs, from the interpreter on land, from the weather on pride. He speaks last when blame is in the air, and first when credit is. If he cries, and some do, he does it where the stove can't see him, then comes back and ties a better knot. In the evening, order relaxes, but does not sleep. Socks are hung in rank. Mitts stand like small animals by the stove. The ledger closes with a line that tries to be unremarkable. Work done, spirits decent. Outside, the dogs curl into commas. The ship, if there is a ship, creaks like an old book. Inside, someone tells a story about a bakery in a city no one can smell anymore, and laughter finds its way around tin cups. Mutiny, in the grand operatic sense, will not visit a crew that laughs like this. The quiet kinds will still knock at the door. Order will answer, as always, with lists. Tomorrow comes with new arithmetic. The ice will vote, the sky will campaign, the ledgers will open. If discipline has done its work, the day will be hard and possible. If it hasn't, the North will edit the expedition out of its paragraph. Keep the books, keep the promises, keep the tone. The place doesn't care. That's exactly why you must. What we found, what we took, the ledger of discovery. By now, the map in your head looks less like lines and more like habits. You know that tea is infrastructure and fat is miles. You can hear ice thinking. You can tell when a dog is lying about a paw and when a man is lying about a mood. You have learned that the ship is an animal, the tent is a verb, and the ledger is a stove that burns numbers into heat. So what did the first expeditions actually find? And what did they take? On purpose, by accident, or without permission? They found coastlines that had always been there and wrote them down as if time began with ink. They found channels that sometimes existed and sometimes didn't, and discovered that Northwest Passage is a seasonal rumor you can sail only in the tense of luck. They found new ways to be wrong with confidence and a few durable ways to be right with humility. They found that the compass near the pole behaves like a poet, moving, beautiful, unhelpful, and that the sextant cannot negotiate with fog. They found pressure ridges that make theology out of ice. They found that frostbite is not drama, but policy. That scurvy is not punishment, but chemistry. That sleep is not reward, but maintenance. They took notes, samples, and measurements. They took seal, caribou, narwhal, and the lives of dogs who turned hunger into distance. They took knowledge that was offered and knowledge that was not, sometimes paying, sometimes failing to. They took stories home and turned them into medals, paintings, and names on maps that coincidentally erased other names. They took pride north and sometimes brought it back shredded into something that could learn. In a good ledger, the column marked borrowed north never balances in your favor. The expeditions that came back alive and intelligent wrote credit where it belonged. To Inuit clothing that moves moisture and traps heat. To snow houses that reorganize the physics of breath. To kamutiks that bend over bad grammar and keep traveling. To roots that thread the seasons instead of quarreling with them. To the specific foods that kept collagen honest. They learned that knowledge here is local, communal, and footnoted. You memorize the footnotes or the place edits you. The work looked heroic in London and ordinary on the ice. Ordinary is what saves you. The ritual of unfreezing a boot into a boot again. The rule that dogs eat first. The way a knot tied with mitts earns a private smile. The discipline of writing men good when the day was not. The refusal to spend today's heat on a speech when a list will do. Great feats reduce at arm's length into chores chained together without complaint. Up close, the chain is the feet. There were failures that still teach. Ships pinned and splintered because iron forgot to bend. Parties lost in a land that was trying to help them in its own syntax. Pride where listening would have been cheaper. The ledger is brutal but fair. It records catastrophe with the same cramped hand it uses for lunch, standard. We don't read those lines to be entertained. We read them to avoid printing them again. There were also days of clean success that don't paint well, a lead opening at the right hour, a pace kept angry but never sweaty, a sunsight snagged through a 1-minute Mercian cloud, a depot reached precisely when the calendar looked hungry. No statue commemorates adequate, but the Arctic does. It spares those who practice it. If you need a short creed to take away, it could be this. Care is heat. Lists are stoves. Fairness is miles. Credit your teachers. If the method that saved you had a name before you did, write the name. Move at the speed of respect. For weather, for animals, for people, for limits. Be boring on purpose. Boredom is what heroism looks like before an audience arrives. Turn back is not failure. It is how you become a witness instead of a rumor. What did the Arctic give in return? Perspective that bites. You learn your size. You learn that your comfort is a fictional character who cannot survive a rewrite. You learn that meaning is something you carry in small tins. Notes in a cairn, a sketch of a coastline, a set of field numbers that will outlive you in a library. You learn that courage without humility is a weather pattern, impressive, brief, and expensive. And you learn that you wouldn't last a day is not an insult. It's a truth about physics, not character. Most of us wouldn't. The place is indifferent, which is a kind of honesty rare on maps peopled with dragons and triumphs. Those who did last, one day, then another, did so by practicing a style of attention that looks unromantic when written down. It is not unromantic. It is love expressed as maintenance. So we close the ledgers. We fold the tent the way a good sentence folds around its meaning. We run a last hand along the runner to feel warmth in the grain, a craftsman's goodbye. We check that the cairn note is legible and dry and dated in a hand that refuses panic. We feed the dogs and let their breathing become a punctuation you can sleep to. We bank the stove so the morning will forgive us. We take one look at the sky, not to be inspired, just to be informed. Back where rooms have corners and clocks obey, someone will ask what the Arctic is like. You will fail to answer in a paragraph. You will talk about the taste of cold, metallic, and faintly sweet, as if chewing a coin made of sky. You will mention parhelia and pressure ridges and a ship that tried to live. You will say that tea is infrastructure. You will say that a caribou parka doesn't look like science, but it is. You will say that maps are paid in breath. You will say that you learned to write men good when men were only adequate, because up there adequacy is an achievement. And then you will go quiet, because the place is best explained by chores done right. Thank you for walking north with me, through the lists, the ledgers, the dogs, the jokes that kept the stove from feeling alone. If any of this made your blanket feel thinner and your tea taste more honest, then the story did its work. We'll leave our note in the cairn and turn for home, which is also a skill. If you like getting cold on purpose with me, history told at the temperature it happened, please like the video and subscribe. It helps this little stove keep burning, and it means you won't miss the next march into the white. Until then, dry socks, fair wind, and good notes.